Good evening, my fellow freedom warriors. As I stipulated earlier, I would come on and do a video and try to catch up to some of the work that I left on the floor at the rally in Red Deer. But I'm glad that you're here with me tonight, and hopefully we cover some information that will help you to make good decisions in the process leading up to the by-election and future election when they call the general election in Alberta. I'd like to thank all of those who are in attendance for taking time out of your lives to take care of the important things. I know there's a lot of important things, but I don't think anything is more important than freedom. And that's what that rally was really about. We're about a new political party, but that party represents freedom for Alberta. I want to reiterate the hopeless situation that Alberta really is in, and I found it really interesting. I didn't know Bruce, the law professor who spoke at the rally. Quite a guy coming from Ontario, a law professor, and he pointed out the hopeless situation that Alberta is really in and recommended that Alberta work towards independence, which was quite a shocker for me. I had no idea I was going to say that, but he said that Alberta has been captive to a federal system for some time, but that we need to pursue our freedom because Canada is not working for Alberta. And I'm paraphrasing his talk or speech, but basically that's what he said. And I find that encouraging that somebody that's coming from Ontario would have that perspective. And if that's the case, there must be others as well. The interesting thing is, I think the entire world, or anybody that's familiar with Canadian politics, knows that Alberta has been on the losing end of Confederation since day one. I think everybody knows that except Danielle Smith for some reason. She hasn't got it figured out yet that if Alberta stays in Canada, that eventually the power brokers of central Canada will absolutely destroy the province of Alberta because they can't afford Alberta to be too prosperous, because that might cut into their power. So we'll move on here. I want to talk a little bit about Mark Carney again, because I think it's absolutely critical. And when you're talking to your friends and your neighbors, you need to have some ammunition. Mark Carney, as I said at the rally, is a lying hypocrite. He's a globalist thug. He was installed by the worst characters on the planet. He was installed by the United Nations, and just a little background on the United Nations so you know who installed him. The World Health Organization guy, Tedros, he is bought and paid for by the Communist Chinese. He's not a doctor, and anyway, he was the president of Ethiopia, invited the Communist Chinese to come into Ethiopia. They own Ethiopia, and his plum for allowing the Communist Chinese take over his people was a big fat job at the World Health Organization and millions of dollars. So that's the kind of people that Mark Carney deals with, and that's who's in his playground, if you will. And then, of course, we have the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab. And I wouldn't be too surprised if Mark Carney is the guy that's replacing Klaus Schwab as the head guy at the World Economic Forum. He is one of the guys in the top echelon, and he is the architect of net zero, and he's the architect of you will own nothing and you will be happy. And the other one who is the other group that are part of installing Mark Carney, and they were instrumental in grooming him when he was at the Bank of Canada and then at the Bank of England. And I didn't get to tell you that the former Prime Minister of England, did a video before the election. And I don't know if it circulated in Canada, but certainly circulated on social media, that Mark Carney was a one-man wrecking ball, totally destroyed the economy of England in 3 years, and she said they don't know if they'll ever recover from the damage. So who would have worked with him to do all of these things? Well, the World Bank. The World Bank is made up of global elite bankers, aristocrats, and they basically tried to totally control all of the banking and the monetary policies of the world. They are an evil group. They're the ones that decide if we're going to have wars, if we're going to have inflation, if we're going to have recession. And so these are the kind of guys that Mark Carney surrounds him with. They're just a stellar bunch of globalist whack jobs. So Mark Carney is not only surrounded by globalist thugs in the finance world, but he is one of the driving forces in the environmental movement. The environmental movement is designed to tax and destroy the middle class. 4 Nobel Peace Prize winners have debunked climate change as nothing more than a hoax. It's just a system in place for the elites to gain power, and that's a fact. And so Mark Carney is part of that. In the meantime, he's going to shut down Alberta's oil and gas industry. He's going to shut down drilling. He's going to shut down pipelines. Of course, that's already effectively in place under Trudeau, his puppet. And in the meantime, Brookfield, his financial management group, are investing in some of the largest oil and gas pipeline projects around the world. So just know this is who Mark Carney is. Probably the most important statement that he has made is that you will own nothing and you will be happy. Let that sink in. The way they're going to accomplish it is going to put in place a social credit system, just like his friends and accomplices, the Communist Chinese, who are trying to take over Canada. And they will use the social credit system, and you'll get points for being a good boy, and you'll get points deducted for being a bad boy. And when you get enough points deducted, you can't even sustain your own life. So that's your Mark Carney, your Prime Minister. That's the man who Danielle Smith is placing her trust in. That's who she thinks that she can negotiate with. She has no representation in the Senate. She has no representation in the House. She's got 34 seats in a parliament that's got 338 seats, and then she's got a Supreme Court that'll just run her out of Eastern Canada, because there's 3 Supreme Court justices from Ontario, 3 Supreme Court justices from Quebec, 3 from the rest of Canada, and so there are really no good avenues for her to pursue if she's going to try and override Carney and some of the decisions that are going to be coming down the pike. And I'm going to tell you right now, that train coming down the track isn't full of lollipops and ice cream. It's a train filled with destruction, not just for Alberta, destruction for Canada. So you need to tell your friends kind of guy that Danielle thinks she can deal with. So now here's where we're going to ruffle some feathers. You know, I've been around the horn and around this game for a long time. Never been a politician. Never could figure out a way to lie good enough to be a politician. I made a promise to the Olds Disbury people. They asked me if they could run a local candidate after when they came around to the full provincial election, and I promised them that I would, proved to be very detrimental for me. But a promise is a promise. At the last minute, some of them wanted me to stay, but we had local people who wanted to run, and I'd made that commitment, so I stepped aside. So I'm not very good at breaking promises. So what I'm telling you, these things are based in fact. I want to talk to those who are blind followers of Danielle Smith. I want to tell you there's only one soul who ever walked this earth that was perfect. And that was Jesus Christ. It is not Danielle Smith. And I know there are a lot of people that think she walks on water, but she has broken every promise. She has failed to accomplish anything other than talk for Alberta. She is not to be trusted. She reminds me so much of Peter Lougheed. He surrounded himself with a nucleus people, just like she's done from the Wild Rose days. Loyalists. They will do anything, they will say anything to cover for Danielle. Peter Lougheed did the same thing. They took the flak, and he was always out front, the good guy. In the meantime, he was selling Alberta down the drain. He signed the NEP, he signed a new Charter of Rights, all of the things that he was advised by legal scholars not to do. But he was a Federalist. Danielle is a Federalist, make no mistake. So what about Danielle Smith's position when it comes to independence? What about her position when it comes to honoring the wishes of her constituents? Well, I happen to know that behind closed doors she was asked the question, what will you do if there's a referendum that gets over 51%? Her answer should have been, I'm going to honor the will of the people of Alberta, and we will begin immediately to pursue independence for Alberta. But she didn't do that. Her answer was this, I will do everything in my power to make, it is my job to make sure that they never get 51% on that referendum. And this is the premier that everybody thinks is so wonderful. Let's just take a little look here. What has she done? You know, I watched her quite closely. Actually, I met with her and introduced her to one of her candidates. And it was all grassroots. She was going to consult with the constituents, and they were going to have more input, and the elected members were going to be right up front and center and have input, and they'd be able to represent their constituents instead of always representing the government position. And she talked a great talk. But once she was elected, things really changed. I had a personal reason to dial in and live stream the Alberta Assembly, Legislative Assembly, when she was elected. I had a vested interest, if you will, and so I would live stream it, and I couldn't believe that it was the same person that was standing on the floor in the legislature and proposing ideas that she wanted to put forward. almost invariably, her solution to a government problem was to have a new panel, new government agency, get rid of one government agency and replace it with another government agency, because her government agency would be more efficient and would do a better job than the government efficiency that was falling apart and not doing the proper job. You know, in all of the time that I watched her, I never heard her propose one single private firm solution. There was never a solution that included the private sector. I was expecting her to get up and say, you know, the private sector could handle that better than the government. It wouldn't cost as much. We're going to try and save some money for Albertans. So let's get the private sector involved in some of these problem areas and get things cleaned up. That never happened. Well, now I know why. She's just almost as far left philosophically as Rachel Notley. Wow. I know that upsets you. I know it upsets you. So let's look at her record. What are conservative principles? I'm going to read you some, if I can find them. These are some conservative principles. Limited government. Have you seen limited government coming out of Danielle Smith's office? Out of her government? And of course, her government is only the cabinet members, not the other MLAs, and she's made that very clear. And if you step out of line, this grassroots lady suddenly forgets about grassroots and their voice, and you're removed from your position in the legislature. There's nothing grassroots about that. That's just good old-fashioned biased politics. And you can get that anywhere for a dime a dozen. So, limited government. Less regulations. Have there been very many less regulations for Albertans? Maybe a few to keep some of the business people a little satisfied. She's removed some regulations. Not much. How about less bureaucracy? You know what that means? That means that you reduce the size of government. Anybody that's a conservative should be able to go into a government situation after 4 years of Rachel Notley's socialist Marxist regime, who just padded every department to the hilt and reduce the size of government. You know what she's done? She's increased the bureaucracy of the Alberta government by about 20%. Instead of cutting it by 20%, she's increased it by 20%. Talked to one guy. I said, "You going to cut anybody?" "No, we need more help. We need more people. We got to start hiring." Does that sound like conservative principles? Not the philosophy that I've studied on conservatism. How about more freedom, more individual freedom? How many of you feel like you've had more freedom under Danielle Smith, especially after COVID? You're still having to get the shot. She's not pushing it, but she hasn't came out and said we're going to get rid of the shot, especially with all of the absolute information. It's not if it's killing people. Now we know it's killing people. They just had a big session in the U.S. Congress, and they had witnesses come forth, and they said that these shots are absolutely killing young people, not old people, young people. They're having heart attacks, they're having pericarditis, myocarditis. blood clots, seizures, strokes, and she hasn't taken the initiative to stop it. Maybe that's because they'll have too much egg on their face because of the doctors who were persecuted in Alberta and who lost their licenses in Alberta. And it might say, well, you know, we made a mistake and we need to rectify that. This shot is banned in Alberta, but that isn't going to happen. How about economic? How about conservative economics? Less spending. You know, Danielle Smith was right up front and center, hammering on Rachel Notley for the spending, the out-of-control spending. So how does she square now that she's spending more than Notley? The budget's about 25% more now than when Notley was in there. Of course, she's going to tell you, well, she had to spend more to clean up Notley's mess, which is absolute damn hogwash. So, she hadn't cut spending. She's increased spending. How about lower taxes? She come out and said you want to lower your taxes? I haven't seen her lowering any taxes. I'm wondering why she hasn't cut the taxes on fuel to give Albertans a break. In fact, why doesn't she just take off all the taxes and do what she said she was going to do and stop sending money for equalization? Even after she had a referendum, she didn't honor that. It's just gone by the wayside. Why not take all that equalization money and give Albertans a real break? In the United States, they're paying about $3 a gallon for fuel, for gasoline. In Alberta, it's about double that. She could do that, but she won't because she's a federalist. She don't want to ruffle too many of them feathers of those elites in Ontario and Quebec. How about a balanced budget? Well, I mentioned that. That's just not in her playbook. A balanced budget? We got to spend money. We got to buy the taxpayers off. We got to make it look like we're doing a project over here and a project over there, and it's all with taxpayer money. But she looks good because she can come on TV and she can tell you that the government is doing this for Albertans. She forgot to tell you she's doing it with your money. So, how about the social aspects of conservatism? Has she said anything about the right to life? Not everybody agrees with it, but it's a conservative value. How about freedom of religion? Freedom to worship. I think you probably have some ministers in that province that doesn't believe that Danielle Smith has any regard for freedom of worship and freedom of religion. That's pretty important if you're conservative. Danielle Smith spent money, taxpayer money, to have a referendum on equalization, and she betrayed him, did nothing. She was going to do something about the pension plan. It was all talk. She did nothing. She thinks that if she comes out with these are threats for Central Canada, and they're not meant for Albertans to actually believe in. They're just threats. How about that new police force you've got? The RCMP are just packing up and leaving in droves. Not going to happen. She always has an excuse. She has an excuse for everything she does that isn't right, that betrays constituents. You are the ones being betrayed. Has she got a habit of betraying? I'd say so. And I know people get tired of hearing about Wild Rose and Danielle crossing the floor, but that says an awful lot about character. When you betray your constituents, go and ask them in High River what they think of Danielle Smith. When you betray your constituents and you convince other people who were elected along with you, who made promise after promise about how things were going to be different now. Grassroots, you know. Sounds good. And then you drag them across the floor with you just about the time you have an opportunity to form the government of Alberta. I think maybe I wouldn't trust that person very far. When you listen to Danielle speak, there's always one thing that gets my attention. She always talks tough. She always says what she's going to do. And then in there somewhere, it's always with this line, within Canada. She's going to do all these wonderful things for Alberta within Canada. Canada has been abused since 1905. Do you really think there's any possibility that the power elites in Ontario and Quebec are going to relinquish any of that power? I just didn't quite finish my story the other day at the rally, but I went there. I said these are simple things. I was a separatist. I was for independence. But I had people pushing me to at least go and make the presentation. So I did. I knew what the results would be before I went. But the invitation was there, so I went. Pierre Trudeau, maybe Justin's dad, I don't know. Did I say that? Anyway, he sent some of his henchmen over there, and they asked me what we wanted, and I told them. They got from the table, and they were roaring with laughter. And as they were roaring with laughter and pushing their chairs back, they said, "You got to be kidding. We have the power. We have the power, and we don't intend to relinquish that power anytime soon." They don't intend to relinquish that power ever. And so, what is the alternative? The alternative is independence. So we have a number of factions in Alberta. And what I'm going to tell you might surprise you, but I'm going to tell you some of these factions may not be legit. Some may have already been infiltrated, and you can bet that any group that's trying to get out of Canada will be infiltrated. I want to tell you a story. So when I ran, after I left Old Didsbury, I ran in Highwood. They ran Calgary Mayor's brother, Harry Alger, Ross Alger's brother. Ross Alger was extremely popular mayor in Calgary forever. So they took his brother, who was not very good at oratory, and he was a nice guy, but he didn't have a clue about why he was there. He just knew that he was picked and he was there. In the debates, when that question had come to him, he'd say, "I don't know that. You better ask Gordy. He probably got the answer for that." Let me tell you what they did in High River, because this is what, and I'm going to tell you right now, that Danielle Smith is cut from the same cloth as Peter Lougheed. So these are the things you can expect. And she's getting her orders from Ottawa, and she's a Federalist. So they sent a guy in there who was an old RCMP, a CSIS guy. First thing he did is came to the meetings and tried to disrupt the meetings. When that wasn't working, then he ran and got on the WCC Board of Directors for the Riding Association. And then he tried to get me removed as the WCC candidate. And then he ran as an independent. along with about 3 other independents that Lougheed sent in there. And then the night, 2 nights or maybe 3 nights before the election in the debate, him as an independent, he got up and he said, Gordy Kesler's a thief and he stole a stack of money that high. Constituency president got up and called him a liar to his face. They wouldn't let me rebut him, but I did. I waited until he asked me a question before I answered it. I went after him and I told him, I said, you're an RCMP. Most of these people don't know that. I said, you know the law better than anybody. If I stole that stack of money, I said, you had an obligation to arrest me right there on the spot. But I said, you know it's a damn lie. I said, I was paid $40 to drive from Wainwright, Alberta, to speak at a fundraiser. They raised $5,000 that night, and they gave me $40 because I'm the kind of guy I wouldn't put one dime on that government credit card unless it was government business. Interesting. I had a reporter, won't tell you who he was, but he called me up and said, let's go have coffee. I don't drink coffee, but I met him anyway. He said, I want to tell you what happened to you. I said, I'm really interested. He said, R.L., whoops, I won't tell you his name. He said he was paid by the government, by the Lougheed government, a lot of money to come in there and destroy you. Oh, I said, really? How do you know that? Well, he said, I'm in the business of finding and getting information. I said, okay. I said, what happened? He said, well, what they did, besides running extra candidates and giving him probably $50,000 to run against us with $35,000, they paid him $250,000. And the way they did it, they did a documentary called the W.O. Mitchell Special. I want you to look it up, and at the end you'll find his name. It says, we would like to thank the following people for the use of their land in the making of this film, this documentary. And at the very end it says, this is a production of the Alberta Heritage Trust Fund. They used $250,000 out of the Alberta Heritage Trust Fund to pay that guy to destroy me. So I'm telling every one of you independent candidates, you don't trust anybody that you don't know when they come in there and start making demands, because that's what you're up against. And there were a million other dirty tricks. The RCMP would watch as our signs were ripped out of the ground and hauled off every single night, and not one of those RCMP would do anything about it. Not one of them. And they knew who they were. But they had no trouble arresting my campaign workers at night because they had a taillight out on their car, or they parked on the wrong side of the road when they were planting a sign. So those are things you're going to run into. So that's enough of that. I just want you to know, politics is a blood sport, and you're going to be in the middle of a serious election. If Alberta's going to become independent, it's a tough road to hoe. Now, a lot of you think that, so now I kind of strayed away, but we've got all these groups. I'm just telling you, you got to be careful. I would like to see all of them come together. I think we have to recognize that the cause is bigger than any individual group or any individual. And, you know, there are a lot of egos out there. We started this and we're going to finish it and all of that. Don't let that happen, because if you do, you're going to lose this war. This is a serious fight you're in. You have got to somehow put your differences away and come together. I know a lot of you don't want a party. You think you can accomplish this without a party. How's that working for you so far? Not very damn good, is it? Huh? We got APP out there, who think they discovered independence 4 years ago. They discovered independence. They didn't discover independence. They just want the credit for it. That's what happens when egos get in the way of truth. I have nothing against them except I would like to see them come together and support the Alberta Republican Party in this cause. Somehow. Put their egos aside. It's a damn tough job when you're dealing with lawyers and a gunslinger that works with him. But they have got to put those egos aside. Every single person needs to do that if you're going to get to the goal line. And then there are those who want to throw the bomb and think this is going to happen overnight. It's going to take, it cannot take more than a year. It cannot. Maybe 2 years at the most. And you're going to see that. You're going to see the carnage coming from Carney, and you're going to say, we got to get the hell out of here. So it needs to be on a fast track for sure. And we can't have internal squabbling and differences. You know, the WCC, we had Westfed, and we had 2 or 3 other groups, and they just worked diligently to try and destroy Western Canada Concept. We got one group on board, but for the most part, they wouldn't come on board, and it really didn't help. And then we had some plants that were out there for the government, and they would get on talk shows, and they pretended to be separatists and independence people, and they weren't. And they were basically hired to get on these talk shows and make comments in news reports and stuff to try and discredit the Western Canada Concept. Didn't help. So you can't have that stuff going on. I mean, I know it's a democracy, and you have your freedom. Everybody has to be free. That's a wonderful thing about democracy. It's even more fun, more wonderful if it's called a republic, but you're not there. You never know, you might get there. You never know. Just might get there, but there's other things to do first. And those first things are independence. You got to break free. That lawyer said, whatever it takes, you got to break free. He said, this is not a legal decision. He said, this is a political decision. And if it's a political decision, that means it's up to the people. The power is in your hands. And you need to grab that power, and you need to run with it. And you need to make sure that you reach the goal line, even if it's scratching out 1 yard at a time against some really, really tough opposition. It's got to happen. So now we come to a couple of elephants in the room. I can't tell you how many people have put on my Facebook page, all you're going to do is split the vote. They're madder than hell. You're going to split the vote. Well, I don't think that if splitting the vote, after what I tell you about Mark Carney, is your biggest concern, you're not paying attention. I'm going to tell you right now, you damn well are not paying attention. This Mark Carney means to destroy you and your future and the future of your kids. I've talked to Cameron Davis. Cameron has some solutions to the vote splitting problem that you're concerned about. And if you got somebody in there in power right now in the premier's chair that isn't living up to principles of conservatism, what the hell do you want her there for anyway? If you're a conservative, are you a conservative? Look in the mirror and ask yourself, are these the principles I believe in? And are these the things that are happening in Edmonton? And if they're not, then you need to replace the person that doesn't believe in conservatism. You know, it used to be easy to say, well, how can you possibly believe in these people? They're progressive conservatives. How can you be a liberal conservative? Or a liberal conservative, because progressive means liberal. We're liberal conservatives. Well, it was good they got rid of that, because it's just not possible. But it's not possible to vote for somebody that claims they're conservative and they're running on a liberal train. You can do it. but I hope you're not doing it in good conscience. So there's a way around it. The next elephant in the room is we don't need another party. We don't need another party. We got a party. We got enough damn parties. Yeah, they're all liberal. You want all liberal? You're good. I'm telling you, the proof is in the pudding. Look at the policies. Look at the deceit. Somebody being damn careless with the truth, I'd say. Every time they come on TV. That blue cowboy hat does not make her a conservative. Reducing the size of government, reducing regulations, reducing spending. Stop supporting a tax system where there's no representation. That's a conservative. So, why do you need another party? Let me tell you why. I was one guy, and I don't want to make this about me because there were a lot of people worked their tails off to get me elected in Old Didsbury. This is not about me. But the results of my being elected were astronomical. Who's the voice out there for independence? You got so damn many voices, nobody knows who to listen to, and I hear it every day. Who do I listen to? I got people sending me messages every single day. Who do I listen to? Do I listen to the APP? Do I listen to Wexit? Do I listen to this? Do I listen to that? All of these people want to know, where should I go? Hopefully all of these people will see you guys come together, all you independent-minded groups, if you haven't been infiltrated or if you're not a front for the federal government. Hopefully you'll come together and we won't have this division. We need to get all the horses on the wagon pulling in a straight line, or the wagon ain't moving. So when I got elected, and before I got to Edmonton, that very night, I was on Cross Canada with Barbara Frum. And I was able to expound on separation back then, independence. Do you think I'd have been on the Barbara Frum show if I hadn't been elected? There were calls for interviews all around the world. I was on front pages of newspapers in Sweden, Norway, France, England, you name it. I had the newspaper called Le Monde from France, biggest newspaper in France, maybe one of the biggest in Europe, called me to do an interview, and they flew somebody from France to Alberta to do an interview. Do you think if I hadn't been elected, that would have happened? Do you think those things were being reported and it was giving independence a voice? All these other groups that aren't parties can't have a candidate. You have to run as a party, or you can't run unless you go get a bunch of signatures and run as an independent. But these other groups can't run, and so they're not going to have that voice that needs to be there. Cameron Davis will have a chance every single day. He's one guy. I was one guy. But I was able to put our ideas and principles forward every day. I was able to bring up independence. I was able to talk about the disparities between Eastern Canada and Alberta. I was able to talk about the injustices. I was able to talk about the provincial government corruption. All of those things were front page stories. They had a Alberta Report. Ted Byfield covered me nonstop. His wife or Link were in my office almost every day. Do you think that would have happened if I hadn't been elected? So for you people that think that having a party is a disadvantage, you really missed the boat, because it's a huge opportunity. It's a huge opportunity, and it's amazing that Cam is willing to step forward, because it's a slog. It's not easy. And he's going to get more mud thrown at him. He's going to have people come out of the woodwork that he didn't even know that are going to accuse him of things that he's never heard of. Hell, I was a communist. Hell, I got people now that think I'm a communist. I got people that think I'm a federalist and accuse me of not being a separatist. I wish they'd have walked in my shoes just maybe for a week. They'd have found out when my phones were bugged for 2 years by the RCMP, when the damn banks and the government tried to break me. Don't tell me I'm not a separatist and I'm not for independence. I'd like to box that guy on the side of the damn ear for even suggesting it. Anyway, there are people out there that talk like that. So, you've got to quit. Do you know who the biggest spreader of you're going to split the vote? Danielle Smith. That's her bargaining chip. That's her ace in the hole. You can't vote for those guys because they'll split the vote. She forgets that that's what they were saying about her. You're going to split the vote. Did they quit and back off and go home because they were going to split the vote? No. And you can't either. You just can't quit and go home. So I've been on here quite a while. And I'm not going to go too much more. But I would beg you to think what I've told you about Mark Carney. I would beg you to realize that this isn't just about independence or separation or oil and gas. This is about the freedom of future generations. Look in the mirror. Not just your freedom, it's your children, your grandchildren. Do you think that big fancy truck in the driveway and that boat you got at the lake is worth letting this opportunity pass you by to save the freedom for them? What are you going to tell them? Well, we were too busy boating and we were afraid we'd split the vote. That's why you're in bondage still. Albertans have been second-class citizens for over 120 years. Second-class citizens. They have paid the bills, $20 billion a year. They're still paying the bills because Danielle didn't live up to the agreement that she made with Albertans that with the referendum she'd stop the payments to the equalization payments. So you're still footing the bills. Wouldn't it be nice to have all that money for hospitals and education and highways? My goodness, those highways on Highway 2 between Red Deer and Calgary are just atrocious. Wouldn't it be nice to have a few billion to get that highway so that it didn't feel like you were going across the plowed field? So I will never need permission from anybody. There's lots of people say to me, what the hell are you in this fight for? It's none of your business. You don't even live here. Freedom is everybody's business. My wife says, what are you doing? You don't have any dog in the fight. I got lots of dogs in the fight. I got friends. I got family. I told him the other day, I said, I got a flag of Alberta tattooed on my heart right next to the Stars and the Stripes. And I mean it. I don't need permission to fight for freedom. And sometimes freedom comes at a high cost. I know that. I've paid it. Don't let the threats deter you from the mission. You will have threats. There will be RCM taking down your license plates and calling you and say you went to this meeting or you went to that meeting. I know from experience. I had a lot of people come to me and said, RCMP called me and told me if I kept going to these meetings, they were coming down on me. That's why we shouldn't have them in the province of Alberta. They are not provincial cops. They work for the federal government. That's who they work for. They are not. I know there's some nice guys out there, but when the orders come to them from Ottawa, suddenly they are not your friends. They work for the federal government. And they come and knock on your door and threaten you. You cannot let that deter you. You can't let your neighbor's threat deter you. You can't let people who call you a traitor deter you. Nothing can deter you from this fight for freedom. Just like the Boston Tea Party, where the tea was thrown off the ship in protest because of taxation without representation. It started the greatest movement on the earth that has ever taken place. 3 years later, the United States of America signed a Declaration of Independence and started down the road to freedom. Alberta, this is your opportunity to do the same thing. I pray that God will bless Alberta every day and keep all of you safe. And God bless you. I know this was a little long, but I hope you have a wonderful night. Good night.